Okay, this is working. All right. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to host this event at LSE. I am a professor at LSE, so it's great to see you all here. We are delighted today to have Rupal Patel deliver our keynote speech this morning. As Chris mentioned, she stepped in the very last minute. So huge thanks to Rupal. Rupal is a senior economic advisor at the Bank of England, where she has worked for over a decade on the biggest challenges facing the economy, including Brexit, COVID, the Russia-Ukraine war, the LDI crisis, and the recent high inflation period. Most recently, she advised senior policymakers on decisions such as setting interest rates. She has appeared on various media outlets, including the BBC Breakfast, BBC Radio 4, and various podcasts and literary festivals. She holds a BSc in economics from the University of Nottingham. I studied there 1 year during my undergraduates, and an MSc in economics from London School of Economics. Today, Rupal is going to talk about her Sunday Times best-selling book, Can We Just Print More Money?, which demystifies complex economic concepts for a broad audience, reaching readers from school children to pensioners. As someone who has been teaching economics to first-year students for over 20 years, I've seen firsthand the spark that comes with the aha moment, the shift from confusion to clarity, from abstract jargon to real-world insight. Economics makes sense of the world, and I think Rupal's work captures that very magic. So it's a real pleasure and privilege to have her today. So please give a warm welcome to Rupal.
Thank you very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here at LSE today. It doesn't feel so long ago that I was sitting where you are as a student. And so it's a bit odd and maybe nice to be this side of the room for once. So today I want to talk to you about how I've been able to have impacts in the world of economics through communicating it in a more unconventional way than I thought I would set out to do when I was a student. But before I get to that, I wanted to start by speaking about my career so far and how I found myself here. So like most of you, I think, or everyone here, I love economics. I started studying it at school just as Lehman Brothers failed. And I was very confused about why a bank I'd never really heard of really meant that, my parents and their friends were worried about their jobs, my favorite shops on the high streets were closing down, and the news were full of images of bankers packing up their stuff with sad faces outside of tall glass buildings. So by studying economics, it really made me make sense of the world and what was going on around me, and I really enjoyed it, so much so I went to go and study at university. And at university, when I was about to graduate, I knew I wanted to use my degree to have an impact. And at the time, quite a lot of institutions, mainly government and public sector institutions, were looking at how to get ourselves out of the financial crisis. And in particular, the Bank of England was doing a lot of work on post-crisis reforms in the banking sector. So I applied on the graduate scheme and found, surprisingly, that, I got in. And I've been there for nearly over a decade now. So this picture on the left actually it was taken on the first week of me being at the Bank of England with some of my fellow graduate peers, some of which are still there. Alongside Mark Carney, who was the governor at the time, who has now become the Prime Minister of Canada more recently, and also then the Deputy Governor, Andrew Bailey, who is now the governor. And as you can see, I'm very fresh-faced and very excited and happy to be there. When that photo was taken, I was told that most people who work there will have one career-defining crisis during their time. I've been fortunate, or perhaps unfortunate, to have worked on quite a few. So during my time so far, I found myself looking at the impact of Brexit, on the financial system, and in particular doing a lot of contingency planning for no-deal cliff edge scenarios. And you might remember there were quite a few false calls, so it's quite a busy time. During COVID, I led the work alongside Treasury to design the COVID loan schemes for businesses, which made sure they kept afloat until the economy was back open. I also led the impact on the changes in commodity prices on the UK economy, where I really quickly had to learn about all these different types of commodities, which I hadn't, even knew kind of existed at the time, which means that now I know way too much about different types of gas and how it gets into the country. And more recently, I was Senior Private Secretary, which is a bit like Chief of Staff to one of the Deputy Governors, Sir Dave Ramsden, who is on the Monetary Policy Committee. And here my role was very varied, and I had various responsibilities, but main things were advising him on his interest rate decision, writing speeches largely about his interest rate decision, so inflation, and briefing him before meetings. This was probably the most fun and exciting job I've had, largely because it coincided with quite a few things going wrong in the economy. So I was there at the forefront of when the mini budget crisis, which you might remember happening in 2022, and the Bank of England's response to it. I was there also during the failure of Credit Suisse and the failure of SVB UK, which were the first banks to really fail since the financial crisis, as well as the beginning of the Bank of England's quantitative tightening programme, and during their advising during the high inflation period too. So it was quite a busy time actually, but I found it really fulfilling and I've learned so much. And the picture on the left is me alongside the MPC at one of the many Treasury Select Committee hearings, which is when the MPC go and speak to the government and tell them about their interest rate decisions, which at the time were just hiking. So they were quite difficult meetings to be in. But I've done a lot of work in terms of central banking, but perhaps the most rewarding thing I've done in the last few years is actually write a book. So me and my co-author Jack Meaning wrote Can't We Just Print More Money, which is an introductory guide into the economy. And it's not something that I thought I'd ever do, particularly not when I left university or even while I was working at the Bank of England. It's just not something I envisaged, myself doing. But actually, it's been highly rewarding, and the reception from it has been kind of overwhelming. So it's the first book that's been published by the Bank of England in its over 300-year history. It's also one of the first books of its kind to be published by any central bank. So before I go into this detail what the book's actually about, I wanted to talk about why I thought it needed to be written in the first place. And as the title of my talk suggests, it's all about communicating economics to a wider audience. So during lockdown, when the economy was front and centre of the news, it became clear to me that economics had a communication problem. So all of us here, perhaps are a self-selected sample, know that economics is important. It's a powerful discipline which affects lives of millions of people in this country. And the problem is, a lot of people haven't realised this. And even if they have, they're not sure where to get more information. So surveys have shown that 1/2 of the UK's population don't know simple concepts such as interest rates or GDP. And the half that do don't know where to find out more about it and say it's completely inaccessible. And some people in the survey even said that they thought economics was dull and boring, which I'm sure most of you will disagree with. So why is this? Well, I think the problem is that it sits with us economists. For a long time, economics has been hidden by complex algebra, long equations, and also long words. So when we speak to each other, we understand what we're saying. But if anyone without a grounding in economics joins the conversation, they feel excluded. So that's why in the book, I've tried to take out all the jargon, all the graphs, and most of the equations, although one did leave it in, which I have regrets about and won't be doing again. But by removing all the jargon, it becomes easier to show people that economics can be relevant to their lives. So one example of this is the title of the book, Can't We Just Print More Money?, which refers to central banks' quantitative easing programs. So lots of people would think of QE as central banks printing money. And that's characterized in this popular meme that went around when the Fed did a big QE program during COVID. So this is a picture of Jerome Powell, who is the chairman of the Fed at the moment, of him printing lots of money. Now, if you asked a group of economists about QE, they would say it's not about printing money, no one uses cash anymore, and QE is all about actually just adding zeros and spreadsheets. And if you really get them talking, they'll talk about portfolio rebalancing and signaling channels. And at this point, even if you have a PhD in it, you're going to tune out. And that's what most people do. But the thing is, QE is a very important policy. It affects millions of people around the world. And so it's important that people know how it's done, what it means for them. And so printing money might not be wholly accurate, and you might lose some nuance, but it does get the message across. And so the skill in translation is all about simplifying without losing the underlying message. And one way to do that is perhaps thinking a bit outside the box, which I'll come on to soon. So the inability to communicate economics is not in a way that is relevant and resonates with everyone is not without consequence. It means that economics has long been practiced and understood by a small group of people, which represent a narrow slice of society. So I know the Royal Economic Society have done quite a lot of work looking into this. And so this is part of, these photos are part of one of the competitions they ran, where they asked children to draw what they thought economists looked like. So this is only a small sample, but I can let you know that actually all of the drawings were exclusively of men. They all looked pretty old, and they all seem to be a bit obsessed with money. Now, the sad thing is, and that's not too far from the truth. We know that there's an underrepresentation of women, there's an underrepresentation of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as those from ethnic minorities. And it's not just an issue at institutions like the LSE or the Bank of England, but it starts at school. So other research that's been done by the Royal Economic Society shows that boys are 3 times more likely to study economics at A-level than girls, and children from private school are twice as likely to study it at A-level than those from state schools. And more recently, I heard that fewer than 15 teachers graduated as economics teachers in the UK last year, which means that over time, there'll be fewer and fewer economics teachers, and departments and schools will have to start closing down. So you might ask yourself, why does this matter? Well, it matters because economists, as I'm sure you all know, make important decisions. They make decisions such as, like they'll decide what your mortgage rate will look like next year, or whether taxes go up or down. And so it's important that when these decisions are made, they reflect, the whole of society, and so it benefits all. The other thing is, by a lack of diversity in economics, it means that people might feel less engaged in it and might not want to learn more or be put off by learning more. And that's why me and my co-author wrote Can't We Just Print More Money? We wanted to make sure that included everyone, and that everyone felt included in the conversation. So to do that, we structured it around 10 questions. So questions that we were asked by friends and family. So things like, why am I richer than my great-great-grandmother? Why are all my clothes made in Asia? And even, why can't we just print more money? And while writing the book, we tried to make it fun and as accessible and relevant as possible by using examples that people could relate to. So, for example, instead of talking about the merits of industrial action, we talk about a Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson and his buddies go on strike and then are replaced by killer robots. You can also use that to talk about automation and technological progress in the workplace. And we've even used Chris's work, who I think has had to leave, but instead of just talking about matching inefficiencies and the search and match model in the labour market, we also talk about it in the dating market and how dating apps have reduced matching inefficiency, but there'll always still be some level of people who will stay single in that market. So that's to make economics more relatable to people's lives. To make it more accessible, the Bank of England have kindly used the proceeds of the book to donate a book to every state school in the UK. So every child has access to learn more about economics, even if there isn't a department of economics in their schools and they don't offer GCSE or A-level in it. As well as that, some educational experts have turned it into a teaching resource for GCSE English literature, which might seem a bit odd because what's economics got to do with English? Well, the thing is, because there aren't many schools now offering English GCSE, it means that if you put it on the English literature curriculum, which I think most students have to do, you get this more number of people leaving school with some sort of economics education than without. But the thing is, me and my co-author didn't really write this book just for children. We wanted to make it accessible for everyone. And so it's not just, a simplified version that school children can learn from, but anyone of any age as well. And what's more, since it's been published, the book's been translated into about 10 languages. So loads of people around the world can also benefit from learning more about economics. Now, I know all of you are a very well-informed audience, so I don't want to spend any time teaching you anything new. But I thought it would be useful to delve into one of the chapters to show you that economics, if you think about it from a different angle, can appeal to a wider audience and can make it more interesting for everyone. And perhaps it's something that you can take away in your own jobs as well. So one of the chapters in the book is inspired by the Queen. Back in 2008, the Queen came to the LSE to open up a building. And while she was escorted around, she asked the question where I think most people in the nation at the time were thinking, why did no one see the financial crash coming? Now, if I was there on the day, I would say it's a bit complicated. You see, the average person will live through around 8 economic crashes in their lifetime, which is twice as many times the average person moves house. And depending on how old you are, you'll know that no 2 crashes are the same. So if you look at the Wall Street crash in 1929, you'll know that the stock market fell and millions of people lost their jobs. And it resulted in the great, a very, very deep depression. But then if you fast forward to 1987, the stock market crashed again. And this time, very few people lost their jobs. And actually, the UK economy boomed a few years after that. So what causes these crashes? Well, it can be down to many factors: high interest rates, high inflation, wars, pandemics, or a combination of them all. But the most common type of financial crash is caused by speculative bubbles, or the bursting of speculative bubbles. Now, speculative bubbles develop when people act a little crazy. They start buying things because they think that something's going to go up in price, and because they do buy them, the value of it does go up. But eventually people realize that the thing that they're holding on to isn't worth as much as they think it should be, and they start selling it, and the price crashes, and a lot of people lose quite a bit of money. Now, you can get speculative bubbles in the housing market or in the stock market, but perhaps my favorite kind of speculative bubble was in the Beanie Baby market back in the early 2000s. So Beanie Babies, for those of you who don't know, are teddy bears, and they look a bit like that, but you can get all sorts of teddy bears. And they usually retail to about £5, I think. But in the early 2000s, people thought that some of them were rare and started buying them up. And this pushed the price up to about £5,000. So on eBay, some of them were selling, for ridiculous prices. And this is a prime example of what economists will call irrational exuberance, where people really do kind of go insane with their money. So some of the examples during this time was that there was a Beanie Baby smuggling ring. There was also a Beanie Baby bandit who used to steal Beanie Babies. When he finally got caught, it turned out it was an 80-year-old man who just wanted to make a bit of money. There were also stampedes quite regularly in shopping centres in America, where they were told that a rare teddy bear was being put on sale, and everyone would turn up, and the stampedes even caused children to get injured quite often. So it was quite a weird time. Perhaps my favourite example of rational exuberance is shown by this picture here, which is taken in a divorce court in Las Vegas, where a couple are splitting up their investments, or what they think are their investments, which are Beanie Babies. So it was a bit of an odd time. And oddly enough, I was talking about the Beanie Baby bubble at a literary festival a couple of years ago. And a man came up to me at the end and said that actually he'd made his fortune from selling Beanie Babies here in the UK. And so much so that he bought his house and his daughter a house in cash and retired early. So there probably was money to be made at the time. But as we know, when things, whatever goes up must come down eventually, and teddy bears aren't worth thousands of pounds. And soon enough, people realised this, and they stopped buying them and they started selling them. And when that happens, the value plummeted, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. So when doing research on this, I found a story about a family that lost about £100,000 and actually went homeless because they put all their savings into Beanie Babies. But luckily enough, the Beanie Baby bubble bursting didn't ripple out into the rest of the economy. And so, there weren't other repercussions. But during the financial crisis, we know that's not true. Lots of people lost their jobs and businesses closed down. And that's very common during a downturn. But there's some other consequences which people perhaps don't think about that also happen during a downturn. So one of the most immediate impacts of a downturn is that people feel less confident and they stop buying as many things. And one of the things that has been proven that people stop buying downturn after downturn are men's underwear. Turns out men don't think that underwear are essential and stop buying it when they're worried about their jobs. And so this might seem a little strange, but I'm not the only one to have found this. Alan Greenspan, who used to be the former chairman of the Fed in the US, said it was his favourite way of gauging the health of the US economy and kept track of it very closely. And when people stop buying things, businesses also close down. So one of the things that closed down during the financial crisis was McDonald's in Iceland, and I'm not sure if they've reopened yet either. It became very expensive to import in the potatoes and the meat and the ingredients needed to keep it open. One man was so upset by this that he bought the last chips and the last burger going and then enshrined it in a glass case, which is still in a museum in Iceland. And he hooks it up to a webcam so you can see it 24 hours a day. And here's what it looks like 2 decades on. And I don't know if you agree, it doesn't look as bad as you think it might do after, so many years being in a glass case. But it's not just that men stop buying underwear and McDonald's closes down. Downturns can have real impacts on people's day-to-day lives. So health outcomes are worse during a downturn. You're more likely to have a heart attack. Men are more likely to commit suicide. Relationships also get strained. You're more likely to get divorced. But on the flip side, you're more likely to be asked out on a first date. So swings and roundabouts. But because most of the time, downturns come with very negative consequences, it's important that someone looks out for them. But the thing is, for economists, it's really difficult to forecast when a crash is coming. And I like to compare it to forecasting the weather. So meteorologists have got very good at predicting the weather. They know, obviously, when the changing in the seasons are. They've got very good at knowing when it's about to rain. But I'm sure all of you have looked at your weather app before leaving the house and it says it's a clear sunny day, and then you walk out with an umbrella and halfway through your day, it starts pouring it down. So a bit like that, economists are very good at knowing when the economy is shrinking and when it's expanding, but occasionally they're blindsided by a shock, just like you are when you've left your brolly at home. And when economists get it wrong, just like meteorologists, they can get it very wrong. So some of you might recall Michael Fish, who is, I think he was a BBC meteorologist, I'm not sure if he's still working, who in 1987 failed to predict a deadly storm which destroyed a lot of houses and people even died. So the Bank of England had its own Michael Fish moment in 2007 when it failed to predict the financial crisis. And in fact, it even published a report saying that they were predicting a 5% boom. So they were completely wrong. And we all know what happened after that. Now, luckily, since then, policymakers have lots of tools in their toolbox. One of them is, printing money when it's necessary. Which then brings me back to the book, Can't We Just Print More Money? It's been exactly 3 years this week since the book was published, and I've been reflecting on kind of its reach and impact since then. And I'm still quite blown away by the reception. So I think it sold 80,000 copies in the UK, and across the world it's been read by so many people. And I'm still shocked to see it on the bestsellers list, not just for economics, but in nonfiction in general, which is rare for an economist, an economics book to be in general nonfiction, especially when you're competing for the likes of Britney Spears' biography or something like that, which is true, by the way. Britney Spears beat the book Blend last year by two places. And I've also been reflecting on my personal career and my work through, since the book's been published. And when I left university, I always thought I would have an impact in the world of economics through writing academic papers or building DSG models. Never did I think I'd have an impact by writing and talking about men's underwear and teddy bears. But turns out I have. And it's opened new avenues for me that, again, I just never thought I would be doing. I didn't think I'd have the opportunity to talk about economic literacy and the importance of it through talking on radio shows, TV, podcasts, or even attending literary festivals. And surprisingly, the most fulfilling thing about this experience is book signing. And it's not because I get to practice my signature over and over again. It's because I get to talk to people who aren't economists, which is quite nice because that's what my day job involves. But talking to non-economists, you really get to learn their understanding of the economy, where their gaps in their knowledge are and what they actually want from us. And then bringing that back into my day job and advising policymakers, I think has been very beneficial. And hopefully means that policies reflect kind of all walks of society. So I want to finish by encouraging you all to look at ways that you can use different styles of communication in your own work, and perhaps look at audiences you're not already reaching and how you can go about doing that. I think I'll finish there, but that's all I had for you, but I'll take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. Chelsea over there to take the questions. So we're now going to take questions. I think there's a microphone somewhere. So quickly. I think
Yes.
Hi, thanks for the talk, very inspiring. I'm Jinghui from Lancaster University. So my question is basically, it pops in my head that policies aren't always gonna satisfy everyone. So when it comes to those who got benefited, it's fine, right? They might just do whatever they're supposed to do afterwards. But I wonder, like, from your previous experiences during your work or your life, when it comes to those who aren't satisfied, right? How do you kind of trying to convey the messages between sort of, let's say, policymakers and the public? Because that's what I've been trying to figure out the way to sort of convey, because, well, I work in academia and people think you guys are high up, you don't care about if people can afford their lives. But I had a hard time. I tried to, that's the reason why I'm here. So I wonder if you had this kind of similar experiences and how you've dealt with it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I think firstly, by helping people understand why you're doing things, right? So at the Bank of England, obviously, the MPC have been putting up rates. Well, now they're falling, but for quite a few years now, they've just been hiking. It's obviously been having a large impact on people's lives. It's kind of caused the cost of living crisis. And that's quite difficult to communicate, but it's easy for institutions that have a clear remit. So the remit of the Bank of England is to keep inflation on target, even if there are consequences to it. So to remind people that having, inflation which is on target, even if you've got to raise interest rates to get it there, is still beneficial for them in the long run than it is to have runaway inflation, I think. So reminding people why you're doing things, even if it isn't benefiting now, it will do hopefully in the future. I think it's important. And that's where economic literacy comes in as well. If people fully understand why policymakers are doing it, I think that helps kind of bridge that gap where people feel like policies aren't really working for them.
Hi, Rupal. Thank you so much for your presentation and really advancing the spread of the knowledge around the economics. My name is Karina, and I'm working on my second master's degree here at LSE. My question would be, what do you think? What is your take around talking to public, not only about the conventional metrics of GDP, but also broadening the message and incorporating the notions of the beyond GDP and caring for the environment, for the planetary boundaries, for the social cohesion, and for social well-being? I know that we need to start from the basics, but just to get your take, what is your sentiment around these topics as well? Thank you.
Sure. I think talking to the public, it's been really interesting, right? So I was actually quite surprised by how many people were actually interested in economics, even if they didn't think it was economics, right? So, for example, you've talked about environmental concerns. A lot of people are interested in climate change, right? But they don't really know how it relates to the economy or what economists can do and things like that. And so it's quite interesting to hear that what angle they take it at and what angle we can show them that we're looking at, and then kind of hopefully meeting in the middle somewhere. In terms of the different metrics, I think it is important to have, not just GDP in the way that it's measured as a kind of way of measuring how the economy is doing. It's quite difficult to change it, right? And I know countries, and there are different works out there to look into ways of measuring different outcomes. I think one way of doing it is by speaking to people, really, and getting their kind of view on how the economy is working for them and what their concerns are, and then trying to bring them in. But it's just difficult to change things at the moment, right? Because collection's difficult, and we've all kind of measure the economy in one way. So it's important, but difficult to implement.
Hi, my name is Lois, and I'm an economist at the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. You said that you wouldn't put another formula in another book. Will there be another book, and what are the biggest issues you think another book could address?
So there is another book. I'm actually writing it at the moment. No, finished writing it. Which and it's not actually a follow-up to the first one, even though it's probably trying to reach a broad audience in a similar way. So the second book is, so actually before I start what the second book's about, I spent a long time thinking about what the second book could be. So one of the things was, 10 more questions that maybe people wanted to know about economics. But I found it quite hard to motivate that, in the sense that this is quite a good grounding into the basics of economics. And so I thought what was better is to delve into one issue in itself, which is money, because obviously we use it every day. We have to, whether we like it or not. And people feel very passionate about it and emotional. But the thing is that a lot of people don't really know what money is, and not in the sense of, is it pounds or is it shells or, whatever. It's more the mechanics behind money. So what happens when you tap your credit card? How does your money go from your bank account to, the coffee shop's bank account, and all the kind of mechanisms that go on behind that. So it talks about that. And then it's also about when money goes wrong. So, hyperinflation, currency crises, inequality as well. And then the future of money. There's a lot of talk about digital currencies. Will cryptocurrencies be kind of outweigh cash now? What's happening to cash? Is it important that we still keep using it or providing it? So that's what the second bit will cover.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Francesca from the Department for Work and Pensions. I have a question more specific to communication or external communication of the Bank of England. I remember in about, maybe it was 2023, in the midst of the cost of living crisis, the chief economist of the Bank of England, I think it's Hugh Pill, said something along the lines of workers need to stop demanding higher wages. And I remember at the time thinking that was quite a sort of economics PR, not such a great line. But I just wonder, like, has there been any kind of changes in the way that Bank of England think about how they communicate, like to the media and to the public? Because I think when the Bank of England says things like that, it makes them seem very out of touch. Obviously, you have the mandate, the inflation mandate, but I think it just doesn't translate well to people and the kind of impressions that people have on economists and experts. Thanks.
Yeah, so I can't speak for Hugh Pearl and his comments, but I agree that the economists can't really need to be more in touch and sensitive to who's listening to their messages. I think the Bank of England, along with a lot of government, some of the government departments have many audiences it needs to communicate with, right? So one of the main audiences are the financial markets, some are other economists, and then, obviously the general public, in which case there's a big range of who's informed, who isn't informed. And, surveys have shown actually half the population are very ill-informed about these things. And so it's how to reach out to them and get to know them. The Bank of England have done quite a lot in this space. So the book, for example, is one way of trying to get to people that they didn't think they could get to. But they've been doing things like recently doing a bit more on social media, which is something the Bank of England has not been doing. It's quite an old institution, and thinks that publishing long papers is the way to get messages out. They've done a lot by having things like Instagram accounts and teaming up with like influencers to try and reach like younger audiences to help build up their economic literacy. And so when they're a bit older, they'll be able to understand things, the kind of more traditional ways of communication. I also think that the Bank of England have had more kind of stronger lines on why they're doing their policies, which perhaps they didn't have to defend as much previously. When interest rates are flat and they're very low and there's not much happening in that space, you don't have to do so much of like communicating why you're doing things. And so it's got more and more important during kind of the times where we've had to hike.
I'm Clarissa, economist at Oxford Economics. I had a question more about your career and specifically when you were starting out. You've been at the Bank of England most of your career. You said that was mainly because when you left university, you wanted to have a job that had an impact. I was a bit curious about that, and if obviously now you're much more senior in your role, so it's hard, and you're advising senior people, so it's easier to see the impact of your work. I was wondering if there was any times when you were starting out where that was harder to see, and yeah, just kind of your experience throughout.
Yeah, definitely. I've done quite a range of roles at Bank of England, and I've got to say, not all of them I've loved. So I started off in the PRA, so Prudential Regulation Authority, which I have to say I didn't enjoy. It wasn't as analytical as I had hoped it would be. And there I didn't feel like I personally couldn't have much impact, right? But I think to work for an institution like Bank of England, which is all very much policy focused, even if you're not speaking to the most senior people in the institution, you're always working towards advising them in some way or another. I also think it's a great training ground for anyone starting off in economics, right? Because it's just so analytical, and you work with some brilliant people. So you pick up a lot of stuff. So you might not even be working on things that you might set out to work for, but eventually there are like opportunities to kind of get you there if you wanted to.
Yeah, there's one question here. I don't know how we're doing with time. You tell me.
3 more minutes.
Okay, good. So there's a question here. Thank you.
What I'd like to ask is that could you take us through your career path, like from the bachelor's to what you're doing currently? Like, are there any moments where you felt that whether this is the right, like the thing that you want to do for your rest of your life or not? Like, were there any confusions or moments of insecurity? Like, how was it from your early years of education to the Bank of England journey? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as I said, I did my undergraduate at University of Nottingham, and straight after that, I joined the Bank of England, and I was on the graduate scheme for about 2-3 years when I decided I knew I wanted to become like a macroeconomist, and I wanted to be quite a serious macroeconomist, and I thought I'd need a master's basically to do that. So then I took a year of study leave and came to the LSE to do my master's during that. And then went back to the Bank of England after. So I think there was a bit of a time there where I was like, oh, I could do kind of a bit more generalist economics, or I could really kind of go out there and do a bit more specialized, more researchy stuff. So I took the kind of leap to go and do my master's. Then I think there's always a bit of self-doubt, right, and confusion about what you should be doing. I think the great thing about economics means that you just have so many opportunities, and it doesn't have to be in like central banking. There are so many other, to even be an economist, you don't need to work for an economic institution. But I've always kind of gone for looking for opportunities that really interest me, because I found out if I'm not interested in it, I'm not going to do very well at it or stick with it. So I've always looked out for opportunities and seen what's coming. I think I've been fortunate that the Bank of England's always been able to offer me opportunities which I found interesting at the time, and there's always something going on. So that's why I've stayed there for so long.
Right. Do we have any more questions? Oh, yes, we do. Okay, so yeah, the person with the black jacket.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is related to the Bank of England, and as a senior economic advisor in there, what do you think about to communicate with market? Do you think that the players in the market tend to open communication? I mean that because there are lots of debates about inflation and the deal with the inflation, but even if the central bank play interest rate, somehow there are lots of things happen and they cannot do that in a best way. So just I'm curious about how do you communicate with market, and market is open to communicate. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I think one of the big stakeholders the Bank of England have are financial markets. And there's lots going on in that space. So we have a whole area dedicated to talking to markets on a daily basis. So people will constantly talk to market participants, ask them what they're thinking, answer questions as well. We also have briefings for them as soon as there's an interest rate decision made. And so there's kind of a two-way conversation that's always open there. So I think it works fairly well, but you might tell me it doesn't. But it's a kind of a very well-established part of the Bank of England, and the market's always been a key stakeholder.
Okay, we have one more question. Well, we have two more questions. Yeah, that person with the stripes t-shirt or the other one. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Alex Milo. I'm a health economist and I work in a drug and alcohol treatment provider. Biggest tip you've learned in your career so far that you can share with us all, please?
God.
Honest advice.
I think it's the thing that I was saying before, which is always go for something that interests you and actually excites you. So like, don't go for a promotion just because it's a promotion. Go like, just even if it's a lateral move, take the lateral move if it's interesting, because you never know where these things will end up, right? I think it's just don't go into doing things that you know you won't enjoy, even if it means more money or a promotion or, you know, whatever. I think it's probably, it's probably the thing I would say that has. The other thing I actually got told, which was I always have to remind myself, is that you can have mentors and you have sponsors and you have great management, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own career. No one will kind of advocate for you as much as you will advocate for yourself, and it's your responsibility to go out there and get the jobs that you want or the opportunities that you want, because people are too busy advocating for their own in a way. So that's quite important too.
Okay, I think we are on time now. We have some coffee break where you can ask Rupal more questions, and yeah, let's close it here for now. Thank you.